Dr. David Rodriguez had always been different from other kids. While his friends were playing video games or watching cartoons, he was the 7-year-old who stared at the night sky for hours, wondering if someone was staring back. His parents thought it was just a phase. They were wrong. 35 years later, David still found himself looking up at the stars. But now he had the best equipment in the world to help him listen. The radio telescope facility in New Mexico was his second home. Actually, if he was being honest, it felt more like his first home than his empty apartment in town. People called him obsessed. And maybe they were right. David worked 16-hour days, analyzing signals from space, searching for patterns that might prove Earth wasn't alone in the universe. His co-workers joked that he spoke better alien than English, which wasn't entirely wrong. He had created 17 different mathematical languages, designed to communicate with extraterrestrial intelligence. What David never told anyone was why he was so driven. It wasn't just scientific curiosity. Every night since childhood, he had dreams about a woman with silver skin and eyes like distant galaxies. She would speak to him in a language he didn't understand, but somehow always knew the meaning. When he woke up, he felt like he had lost something precious. Though he could never remember exactly what, the dreams had gotten stronger over the years. Sometimes he would wake up with tears on his face, feeling homesick for a place he had never been. His therapist suggested stress. His doctor recommended sleeping pills. David knew better. Something was calling him from far away, and he was going to find it. Tuesday night started like any other. David was alone in the control room, drinking his 5th cup of coffee and watching data stream across multiple monitors. The facility was quiet except for the gentle hum of computers and the occasional desert wind rattling the windows. Most people found the isolation depressing, but David loved these solitary hours when it was just him and the infinite cosmos. At 11:47 p.m., everything changed. The signal appeared on his screen like a whisper becoming a shout. David's hands froze over his keyboard. In 15 years of searching, he had never seen anything like this. The pattern was too structured to be natural, too complex to be random. It pulsed with mathematical precision that made his heart race. David ran the signal through every analysis program he had. Each result confirmed what his gut already knew. This wasn't cosmic noise or interference from a satellite. This was intelligent. This was purposeful. This was what he had been searching for his entire life. His hand shook as he followed the protocols for first contact. Call the director. Alert the government. Notify the international space community. But something made him pause. The signal wasn't just intelligent. It was familiar. The mathematical structure reminded him of something from his dreams, though he couldn't quite place what. David spent the next 6 hours alone with the signal, trying to decode its meaning. As dawn broke over the desert, he realized the transmission wasn't random. It was coordinates, and those coordinates pointed to a location just 50 miles from his facility. By the time the government teams arrived, David had already plotted the location on satellite imagery. It was an empty stretch of desert, unremarkable except for one detail that made his blood run cold. He had dreamed about that exact spot dozens of times. The caravan of black SUVs and military vehicles looked out of place against the ancient landscape. David rode in the lead vehicle, clutching his laptop with the decoded coordinates. Colonel Peterson, the head of the operation, kept asking him questions about the signal, but David barely heard them. His attention was fixed on the horizon, where heat waves danced like memories trying to take shape. They reached the coordinates at sunset. David stepped out of the vehicle and immediately felt dizzy. The desert air seemed to shimmer with energy that made his skin tingle. He had definitely been here before, even though he knew that was impossible. Dr. Rodriguez, are you seeing this? Colonel Peterson's voice cut through David's confusion. David looked up and felt his knees go weak. A craft was materializing above them, appearing like a mirage becoming solid. It was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at directly, all flowing curves and surfaces that seemed to bend light around them. As it settled gently onto the desert floor, David realized he was holding his breath. The ship was completely silent as it landed. No roar of engines, no blast of exhaust, just a gentle settling, like a bird coming to rest on water. For several minutes, nothing happened. The military personnel raised their weapons. But David found himself stepping forward instead of back. A section of the ship's hull simply faded away, revealing an opening filled with soft blue light. David's heart hammered against his ribs as a figure emerged from that light. And suddenly every dream he'd ever had came flooding back with perfect clarity. She was exactly as he remembered, yet more real than any dream could capture. Tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to glow from within like captured moonlight. Her hair moved as if underwater, defying the desert breeze. When she looked directly at him, David felt like he was falling and flying at the same time. Princess Zara of the Andromedan Council stepped onto Earth for the first time. But her eyes never left David's face. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with an expression that mixed surprise with something that looked almost like recognition. Behind him, David could hear Colonel Peterson shouting orders and radio chatter filling the air. Military personnel were establishing a perimeter and calling for backup. Scientists were pulling equipment from vehicles and setting up recording devices. But David heard none of it. The world had narrowed to just two people staring at each other across impossible distance, each seeing something in the other that logic said couldn't exist. Zara took 3 steps forward, moving with fluid grace that made David think of water and starlight. When she spoke, her voice was like music played on instruments that didn't exist on Earth. "I know you," she said in perfect English, though her lips barely moved. The words seemed to form directly in David's mind. "I have seen you in my dreams." David opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. How could he explain that he had been dreaming of her since childhood? How could he tell her that finding her had been the driving purpose of his entire adult life? Dr. Rodriguez, Colonel Peterson grabbed his shoulder. "Step back and let us handle first contact protocols." But David couldn't move. He was staring into eyes that held the depth of galaxies, and seeing something that made no sense but felt absolutely true. This wasn't first contact, this was a reunion. The government facility looked nothing like the movies. Instead of sleek laboratories and high-tech equipment, David found himself in a converted warehouse with folding tables and fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects. The only impressive thing was the security, armed guards at every door and cameras watching every corner. 3 days had passed since first contact, and David hadn't slept more than a few hours total. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Princess Zara's face and felt that strange recognition pulling at his chest like a physical ache. The officials kept him busy with endless meetings, debriefings, and protocol discussions. But all he wanted was to see her again. Dr. Helen Walsh, the project director, paced around the conference table while a dozen government officials argued about communication strategies. David sat quietly, sketching mathematical symbols in his notebook, the same symbols that had been appearing in his dreams for years. "We need to establish basic communication first," Dr. Walsh was saying. "Simple concepts, numbers, basic physics, maybe some pictographs." David looked up from his notebook. "She already speaks English." The room went quiet. General Thompson, a man who looked like he had never smiled in his life, leaned forward. "That's impossible, Dr. Rodriguez. No alien species could have learned our language without prior contact." "I'm just telling you what I heard," David said. He didn't mention that her voice had seemed to speak directly into his mind, or that he somehow understood her meaning even before she formed the words. These people already thought he was too emotionally involved. "We'll start with standard first contact procedures," Dr. Walsh decided. "Dr. Rodriguez, you'll be our primary linguist, but you need to maintain professional distance. This is the most important moment in human history. We can't let personal feelings interfere." David nodded, but inside he was screaming, "Personal feelings?" This wasn't about feelings. This was about something deeper, something that had been growing inside him since childhood. But how could he explain that to people who saw everything through the lens of politics and procedure? 2 hours later, David sat across from Princess Zara in a small, sterile room. A thick glass barrier separated them, with microphones and speakers allowing communication. Security cameras recorded every gesture, and a team of experts watched. From the observation room next door, Zara looked smaller here, surrounded by concrete walls and artificial light. Her luminescent skin seemed dimmed, like a star seen through thick clouds, when she saw David. Though, something brightened in her expression. "Hello, David," she said. And his heart nearly stopped. She knew his name, though no one had introduced them. "How do you know who I am?" he asked. Trying to keep his voice steady for the recording equipment, Zara tilted her head, studying his face with an intensity that made him feel transparent. "I have been dreaming of you since I was a child. On my world, we call it Kellen, the soul call across the void. I never believed it was real until I saw your face 3 days ago." David's hands trembled as he reached for his notebook. The symbols he had been drawing were scattered across the pages, strange, flowing shapes that seemed to dance in his peripheral vision. "These symbols," he said, holding up the notebook, "do they mean anything to you?" Zara's eyes widened, and for the first time since David had met her, she looked genuinely shocked. She pressed her hand against the glass barrier, her fingers spread wide. "Where did you learn the ancient script of my people?" "I didn't learn it," David whispered. "I've been drawing these since I was 7 years old. They appear in my dreams." The observation room erupted in excited chatter, but David barely heard them. Zara was staring at his notebook like it contained the secrets of the universe. When she looked back at his face, there was something new in her expression, not just recognition, but fear. "This should not be possible," she said quietly. "David, what I am about to tell you will sound impossible, but I need you to listen." Carefully, David nodded, leaning closer to the glass. "In rare cases, perhaps 1 in a billion births, consciousness can become quantum entangled across vast distances. 2 souls, born light years apart, become connected at the deepest level of existence. They share dreams, emotions, sometimes even thoughts. My people have legends about such connections, but I never believed them until now." David finished for her. "Until now," she agreed. "The dreams began when I was very young. I saw a blue world with yellow sun, and a man with kind eyes who spoke in numbers and symbols. As I grew older, the dreams became stronger. I began to learn your language through the connection. I saw your world through your eyes." David felt like the room was spinning. Everything made sense now. His obsession with finding life among the stars, his ability to create alien languages, the homesickness he felt for places that didn't exist. "That's why you came here. Not just for diplomacy." Zara nodded slowly. "The Andromedan Council sent me as an ambassador, yes, but I volunteered for this mission because the dreams had become so intense. I could no longer ignore them. I had to find you, David. I had to know if you were real. And now that you know," Zara looked away, and David caught something in her expression that made his stomach drop. There was sadness there, and something that looked like regret. "There is something else you must understand," she said quietly. "This connection between us, it comes with a price. The quantum entanglement that allows our souls to touch across the universe is not natural for beings of our different physiologies. It creates complications." David pressed his hand against the glass, matching the position of her hand on the other side, even through the barrier. He could feel warmth radiating from her palm. "What kind of complications?" "The constant neural bridge between our worlds is slowly destabilizing my biological systems. Every day, every hour that we maintain this connection, my body grows weaker. The doctors on my homeworld estimate that I have perhaps 6 months before the entanglement becomes fatal." The words hit David like a physical blow. He had finally found the missing piece of his soul, the answer to every question that had driven his life's work. And now he was being told that their very connection was killing her. "There has to be a solution," he said desperately, "some way to maintain the connection without the physical damage." Zara's expression was gentle but heartbreaking. "The only known solution is to sever the quantum entanglement completely, to cut the connection between our souls and return to our separate existences. It would save my life, but we would lose each other." David finished. "Forever," she Confirmed, and the part of each of us that has lived and the other would die. We would survive, but we would never be whole again. David stared at their hands pressed against opposite sides of the glass barrier. After 35 years of searching, he had found his other half, and now he had to choose between her life and their love. In the observation room, experts were frantically taking notes and making excited phone calls. They saw this as a breakthrough in understanding alien consciousness and quantum physics. David saw it as the beginning of the most impossible decision any person had ever been asked to make. 2 weeks had passed since the revelation about their quantum entanglement, and David barely recognized himself in the mirror. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he had lost weight from barely eating. Every moment he wasn't working with Princess Zara felt like torture, but every moment he spent with her carried the weight of knowing he was slowly killing her. The diplomatic meetings had become routine. Each morning, David would sit across from Zara in the sterile conference room, translating between her people and Earth's governments. They discussed trade agreements, technology exchanges, and cultural programs. But underneath every conversation was the unspoken countdown of her remaining time. David had thrown himself into research with desperate energy. Every spare moment was spent studying Andromedan physiology, quantum consciousness theory, and any scientific paper that might hold a clue to saving her. His apartment was covered with equations, medical journals, and star charts that meant nothing to anyone but him. Dr. Walsh had noticed his obsession. "You need to step back, David. You're getting too emotionally involved." Emotionally involved? David had laughed bitterly. "I'm watching someone die because of their connection to me. How am I supposed to feel?" But he couldn't explain the full truth. He couldn't tell them that the connection was growing stronger every day, not weaker. When Zara was in pain, David felt echoes of it in his own body. When she was happy, warmth spread through his chest like sunlight. Sometimes he would start to say something, only to realize she had been thinking the exact same words. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. David was alone in the observatory attached to the facility, staring up at the constellation Andromeda through the powerful telescope. Somewhere in that distant spiral of stars was Zara's home, a world he would never see but somehow knew as well as his own. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Zara standing in the doorway. She wasn't supposed to be there. Her quarters were on the opposite side of the building, and there were supposed to be guards monitoring her movements. But somehow, she had found her way to him. "I felt you calling," she said simply, stepping into the dimly lit room. "Not with words, but with your heart." David's breath caught in his throat. In the soft light of the observatory, with stars reflecting in her silver hair, Zara looked like a dream made real. But he could see the subtle changes that marked her. Declining health, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she moved more carefully than before. "You shouldn't be here," he said, though he made no move to call security. "If they find out you left your quarters, let them find out," Zara said, moving closer to where he stood beside the telescope. "David, I need to tell you something, and I cannot say it in that room with cameras and microphones recording every word." She was close enough now that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, close enough to see the galaxy-deep sadness in her eyes. "What is it?" he whispered. "The connection between us is growing stronger every day. My medical team thinks it's because we are no longer fighting it for the first time in our lives. We are in the same physical space, and our souls are trying to complete the bond." David nodded. He had felt it too, the way his thoughts seemed to blend with hers, the way he could sense her emotions like colors in his mind. "But there's something else," Zara continued, "something I haven't told the diplomats or the doctors. David, this connection we share, it's not just rare, according to the ancient texts of my people. It's sacred. Legend says that when two souls become quantum entangled across the stars, it's because the universe itself has chosen them for a purpose greater than either could achieve alone." "What kind of purpose?" Zara looked up through the observatory's glass ceiling at the infinite field of stars above them. "To bridge worlds, to prove that love can transcend not just distance, but the very laws that govern reality." David felt something breaking loose in his chest. like a dam that had been holding back a flood. For weeks, he had been trying to be professional, trying to maintain distance, trying to pretend that what he felt for her was just scientific fascination. But standing here under the stars where their story had begun, he couldn't lie to himself anymore. "Zara," he said, and his voice came out rough with emotion. "I need to tell you something too." She turned to face him fully, and in her eyes he saw the same desperate honesty he felt building in his own heart. "I've loved you for years," David said, the words tumbling out like they had been waiting his entire life to be spoken. "Before I met you, before I knew you existed, before I understood what this feeling was, I've been loving you across space and time, and I can't pretend otherwise anymore." He took a shaky breath, watching her face for any sign of rejection or pity. Instead, he saw tears forming in her eyes, tears that caught the starlight like liquid diamonds. "I know it's impossible," David continued. "I know our worlds are different. I know our biologies are incompatible. I know that loving you is literally killing you. But I can't stop. I've tried to pull back, tried to maintain professional distance. But every cell in my body is screaming that you're my home. You're the answer to every question I never knew how to ask." David reached out with trembling hands and cupped her face gently. Her skin was warm and seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "I love the way you tilt your head when you're thinking. I love how your eyes change color when you laugh. I love that you came across the galaxy because you couldn't ignore the pull between us. I love your courage, your wisdom, your kindness to a species you never met before." Tears were streaming down both their faces now, and I love that for the first time in my life, when I look at the stars, I don't feel alone. Because somewhere out there is your world, your people, your story, and somehow, impossibly, miraculously, you're here with me. David paused, studying her face in the starlight. "I know you're dying because of our connection. I know that loving me is destroying you. And if you asked me to walk away, to sever this bond to save your life, I would do it. It would kill something inside me, but I would do it, because losing you would be unbearable. But watching you die because of me would be impossible." For a long moment, Zara said nothing. She just stared at him with those galaxy-deep eyes while tears traced silver paths down her luminous cheeks. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, but it shattered David's world completely. "David," she said, "you don't understand. I'm not dying because I love you." She took his hands in hers, and he felt electricity spark between their touching palms. "I'm dying because I've been fighting it." David felt like the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "Fighting it? What do you mean you've been fighting it?" Zara's luminescent skin flickered with patterns he had learned meant deep emotional pain. She turned away from him and walked to the large window overlooking the desert, her reflection ghostly against the star-filled sky. "David, everything I told you about the quantum entanglement was true, but I didn't tell you the whole truth." Her voice was so quiet he had to strain to hear her. "I told you that our connection was slowly killing me, and that is correct, but I didn't explain why." David moved to stand beside her, close enough to feel the energy that always seemed to surround her. "Then tell me now, please," Zara pressed her palm against the cool glass, and David watched as frost patterns began to form around her fingers. "In my culture, we have stories about soul bonds that transcend space and time. The legends say that when the universe creates such a connection, it's not meant to be resisted. It's meant to be embraced completely." She paused, and David saw her shoulders shake with suppressed emotion. The ancient texts describe a process called the Great Joining. When two quantum-entangled souls finally meet, they must choose to either complete the bond fully or sever it entirely. There's no middle ground, no way to maintain a partial connection safely. David's heart began to race. "What happens if you complete the bond?" "That's what I've been afraid to find out," Zara whispered. "According to the legends, completing the bond means that two beings become something new. Not human, not Andromedan, but something that exists between worlds. The process is supposed to transform both souls into a form that can exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously." David stared at her reflection in the window. "And you've been fighting against this?" Zara nodded, and a tear rolled down her cheek. Every moment we spend together, every time our minds touch, every dream we share, it's the universe trying to complete the bond. And every moment, I've been using all my mental strength to resist it. But why? David asked, confusion and hurt mixing in his voice. If completing the bond could save your life, because I'm terrified. Zara said, finally turning to face him, David, do you understand what I'm telling you? If we complete this bond, we won't be the same people anymore. We might not even be people at all. We could lose everything that makes us who we are. David felt his world spinning. Everything he thought he understood about their situation had just been turned upside down. So the choice isn't between your life and our love. The choice is between staying who we are and becoming something unknown. Exactly, Zara said. And I've been so afraid of losing myself, of losing you as you are now, that I've been fighting the very thing that could save us both. But fighting it is like trying to hold back an ocean with my bare hands. It's destroying me from the inside. David reached for her hands, and when their skin touched, he felt it immediately, the pull she had been describing. It was like gravity, but instead of pulling their bodies together, it was pulling their souls towards some kind of merger he couldn't begin to understand. How long do we have? He asked. My doctors estimate 3 days, maybe 4, before my body completely shuts down from the strain of resisting the bond. David felt panic rising in his chest. 3 days to make a decision that would determine not just their fate, but possibly their very existence. Have you tried to find others like us? People who have been through this before. Zara shook her head sadly. The last recorded case of quantum soul bonding happened over 1,000 years ago on my world. The couple chose to complete the bond, and according to the historical records, they simply disappeared. Some say they died. Others believe they transformed into beings of pure energy. No one knows for certain what happened to them. David began pacing the small observatory, his mind racing through possibilities. What about your medical team? Surely they have some idea of what the transformation process involves? They know as little as I do, Zara said. The science behind quantum consciousness is still largely theoretical, even for my people. We know the bond exists. We know it can be fatal if resisted. And we know that completion changes the participants fundamentally. Beyond that, we're operating on legends and hope. David stopped pacing and looked directly into her eyes. Zara, I need you to be completely honest with me. If we do nothing, you die in 3 days. If we try to sever the bond completely, what happens? The severance process itself could kill us both, she admitted. And even if we survive, we would lose the part of ourselves that has lived in the other. Based on the few documented cases, most people who undergo severance spend the rest of their lives feeling like they're missing a limb they never knew they had. And if we complete the bond, we might become something wonderful that can exist in both our worlds and help bridge the gap between our species. Or we might cease to exist as individuals entirely, or we might die in the attempt. Zara's voice was steady, but David could see the terror in her eyes. There's no way to know. David felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff with 3 different ways to jump, and all of them led into darkness. So our choices are certain death for you, possible death for both of us with guaranteed loss of part of ourselves, or unknown transformation that could be transcendence or annihilation. Those are our choices, Zara confirmed. David looked up through the observatory ceiling at the stars that had brought them together. Somewhere out there, Zara's people were waiting for her return. On Earth, governments were planning humanity's future based on the diplomatic relations she was helping to establish. The weight of 2 worlds rested on whatever decision they made in the next 3 days. There's something else, Zara said quietly, something I haven't told anyone, not even my own medical team. David turned back to her, dreading what new revelation was coming. The bond between us isn't just affecting me anymore, she said. I can feel it starting to affect you too. Your human physiology is beginning to change to accommodate our connection. Within a week, maybe 2, the strain will start damaging your body as well. David felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of changes? Your brainwave patterns are shifting to match mine. Your cellular structure is slowly adapting to process the quantum energy that flows between us. If we don't make a choice soon, we'll both be trapped in this deteriorating middle state until it kills us." David stared at her, processing this final piece of information. Not only was their love killing her, but now it was going to kill him too, unless they chose to either destroy their connection entirely or transform into something that might not even be recognizably human. "How long do I have?" he asked quietly, based on how quickly the changes are progressing. "I estimate 10 days before the damage becomes irreversible." 10 days. David looked at the woman he loved more than his own life, the being whose soul had been calling to his across the cosmos since childhood, and realized that in 10 days, one way or another, the David Rodriguez who had spent his life searching the stars would cease to exist. The only question was whether he would die as himself, live as half of himself, or transform into something entirely unknown. And they had 3 days to decide. David didn't sleep for the next 2 days. How could he? Every hour that passed brought them closer to a decision that would determine not just their fate, but potentially the future of human-alien relations. He spent the time in his makeshift laboratory, surrounded by every piece of research he could find about quantum consciousness, dimensional physics, and the few documented cases of soul bonding in Andromedan history. Zara grew weaker by the hour. The effort of fighting their natural connection was draining her life force like water, flowing from a broken vessel. Her skin had lost much of its luminescent glow, and she moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body was failing. Yet her mind remained sharp, and she worked alongside David, searching for any alternative to the 3 impossible choices they faced. "Look at this," David said on the second morning, pointing to an equation he had been working on all night. What if the reason previous soul bonds failed wasn't because the process itself was dangerous, but because they didn't understand what they were trying to become? Zara leaned over his shoulder to study the mathematical symbols covering his whiteboard. Even in her weakened state, her proximity made David's heart race and his thoughts sharpen with supernatural clarity. "Explain," she said softly. "Every documented case of soul bonding shows the same pattern," David said, excitement growing in his voice. "To beings attempt the great joining, they disappear from normal reality, and they're never seen again. But what if they didn't die? What if they succeeded in transforming, but couldn't find their way back to a form others could perceive?" David turned to face her, his eyes bright with possibility. "What if completing the bond doesn't destroy us, but elevates us to a state where we can exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously? We could be David and Zara, but also something greater, something that could truly bridge our worlds." Zara studied his face intently. "You're talking about intentionally becoming something that has never been successfully documented. David, we could be wrong. We could die in the attempt. We're going to die anyway if we do nothing," David pointed out, "and if we sever the bond, we'll spend the rest of our lives feeling incomplete. At least this way, we have a chance at something extraordinary." That evening, as Zara's condition continued to deteriorate, David made his decision. He found her in the medical bay, hooked up to machines that monitored her failing vital signs. Dr. Walsh and the medical team had done everything they could, but human medicine couldn't treat a condition that existed in the quantum realm. "Zara," David said, taking her hand carefully, "I know what we have to do." She looked at him with eyes that held galaxies of sadness and hope. "Tell me." "We complete the bond," David said firmly, "not because we're out of options, but because we choose to trust in the connection that brought us together across impossible distance. The universe doesn't make mistakes like this if our souls are meant to be joined. Then we should stop fighting it and embrace what we're meant to become." Tears formed in Zara's eyes. "David, we don't know what will happen to us. We could lose everything that makes us who we are." David squeezed her hand gently. "Or we could become everything we were meant to be." "Zara, I've spent my entire life feeling like I was missing something essential. When I met you, that feeling disappeared. If completing our bond means we transform into something new, then maybe that's not a loss. Maybe that's evolution." Zara was quiet for a long moment, and David could feel her thoughts touching his through their connection. Finally, she nodded. If we're going to do this, we need to do it properly. According to the ancient texts, the great joining requires both participants to release all resistance simultaneously and allow the quantum bond to complete naturally. What does that mean practically? We meditate together, lower all our mental barriers, and allow our consciousness to merge completely. Once the process begins, there's no stopping it. We either emerge as something new, or we don't emerge at all. David felt a mixture of terror and excitement coursing through his veins. When, now, Sarah said, "I don't have the strength to resist the bond much longer. If we're going to choose transformation, we need to do it while I still have enough energy to participate actively in the process." David helped Zara move to a quiet room away from the medical equipment and observers. They sat facing each other on the floor, hands clasped, surrounded by the gentle hum of the facility's ventilation system and the distant sounds of the desert night. "Are you ready?" Zara asked. David looked into her eyes and saw his own reflection. Staring back, in that moment, he realized that he had been preparing for this his entire life. Every night spent staring at the stars, every dream of silver-skinned beings, every equation he had solved in pursuit of alien contact, it had all been leading to this moment. "I'm ready," he said. "I love you, Zara. Whatever we become, I want to become it with you. I love you too, David, in this form and in whatever form comes next." They closed their eyes and began to lower the mental barriers they had both been maintaining. Immediately, David felt the quantum bond between them surge like a river breaking through a dam. The sensation was overwhelming, like being struck by lightning made of pure consciousness. His awareness expanded beyond his body, beyond the room, beyond Earth itself. He could feel Zara's thoughts becoming his thoughts, her memories becoming his memories. But instead of losing himself, he felt like he was becoming more himself than he had ever been. The transformation happened gradually, then all at once. David felt his consciousness stretching across dimensions, existing simultaneously in his human form and in states of being he had no words to describe. He was still David Rodriguez, the scientist who had spent his life searching for alien contact. But he was also something magnificent and new. When they opened their eyes, they were no longer entirely human or entirely Andromedan. Their bodies shimmered with energy that seemed to exist between dimensions. They could see each other clearly, but they could also see through each other to realities beyond normal perception. "We did it," Zara whispered, and her voice carried harmonics that touched frequencies beyond human hearing. David looked at his hands and saw them flickering between solid flesh and patterns of living light. "We're still us," he said in wonder, "but we're also something more." Over the following weeks, David and Zara learned to control their new abilities. They could exist in normal human and Andromedan society when needed, but they could also transcend those limitations to exist in the spaces between worlds. They became the perfect ambassadors between their species, able to understand and communicate the deepest truths of both cultures. Their transformation didn't end with them. Their example inspired others to look beyond the boundaries of their own species and consider the possibilities that existed in connection rather than separation. They established the first truly integrated human Andromedan colonies, places where beings from both worlds could live and work together in harmony. Years later, when other quantum-bonded souls began to emerge across the galaxy, David and Zara were there to guide them through the great joining. They had proven that love truly could transcend not just distance and difference, but the very laws of physics themselves. David often thought back to that night in the observatory when he had confessed his love to an alien princess. He had expected rejection or acceptance. He never imagined that his love would literally transform the fabric of reality itself, proving that some connections are written in the quantum code of the universe, waiting for the courage to embrace them fully. Their story became legend on both worlds, a testament to the power of love, to create something greater than the sum of its parts, and a reminder that the universe's greatest gifts often come disguised as its most impossible challenges.